Here's a rewritten version of the provided text as a single, coherent paragraph without omitting any words. There's just a lot of uncertainty about what happens to the Starliner program. You know, this might not look good right now, but we don't know the end of it yet. Boeing has faced a lot of technical challenges with developing this vehicle all the way back to, 2019. After weeks of debate, NASA has ruled out bringing 2 astronauts back to Earth aboard Boeing's Starliner capsule because of lingering concerns about multiple helium leaks and degraded thrusters, both critical to a successful re-entry, officials said Saturday. Despite successful tests of the Starliner's maneuvering thrusters, detailed analyses, and confirmation that the known propulsion system helium leaks are stable and have not worsened, NASA concluded there is no way to prove the systems will continue to operate normally, ensuring a safe deorbit, re-entry, and landing. The decision means 2 of 4 crew and 9 astronauts scheduled for launch to the International Space Station aboard a SpaceX Crew Dragon on September 24 will give up their seats so Starliner Commander Barry Butch Wilmore and co-pilot Sunita Williams can come home in their place next February. NASA has decided that Butch and Suni will return with Crew 9 next February and that Starliner will return uncrewed, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said at a post-readiness review news conference on Saturday. I want you to know that Boeing has worked very hard with NASA to get the necessary data to make this decision, he continued. We want to further understand the root causes of the earlier problems and understand the design improvements so that the Boeing Starliner will serve as an important part of our assured crew access to the ISS, Nelson said. New Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg assured him the company remains committed to the Starliner program, which NASA is relying on to provide independent access to the space station alongside SpaceX. I told him how well Boeing worked with our team to come to this decision, and he expressed to me an intention that they will continue to work the problems once Starliner is back safely and that we have our assured crew access to the space station, Nelson said. Launched June 5, Wilmore and Williams originally expected to spend a little more than a week in space in the Starliner's first piloted test flight. They'll now spend at least 262 days in orbit, nearly 9 months, before returning to Earth around February 22 with the 2 Crew 9 flyers after they wrap up a normal 6-month tour of duty. In the process, Wilmore and Williams will become the first astronauts in history to fly in space aboard for different spacecraft, NASA's Space Shuttle, Russia's Soyuz, Boeing's Starliner, and SpaceX's Crew Dragon. The Starliner, meanwhile, will be commanded to undock from the space station's forward port as early as September 6 and carry out an unpiloted re-entry and touchdown at White Sands, New Mexico, to bring the long-awaited test flight to a disappointing conclusion. With the Starliner's departure, only the 4-seat Crew 8 capsule, which arrived at the lab last March, will be available to serve as a lifeboat if an emergency forces its 4-member crew, along with Wilmore and Williams, to evacuate before the Crew 9 fare ship arrives. While the odds of an evacuation are remote, SpaceX will work with NASA and the station crew to rig makeshift seats in the Crew 8 Dragon before the Starliner's undocking to accommodate Wilmore and Williams in an emergency. Once the Crew 9 capsule docks, the 4 outgoing Crew 8 flyers wrapping up their own 6-month expedition will reconfigure their ship for a normal undocking and return to Earth around October 1 as planned. Wilmore and Williams will remain behind aboard the station with the 2 Crew 9 flyers launching September 24. The decision ruling out a piloted Starliner return was a crushing blow to Boeing in the wake of earlier problems that delayed the Starliner's first piloted flight by nearly 4 years, required a second unpiloted test flight, and cost the company more than $1.5 billion above and beyond its NASA fixed-price contract. The Starliner woes come on top of Boeing's ongoing struggle to reassure the public in the wake of 2 737 MAX 8 airliner crashes, a close call with an Alaska Airlines 737 flight earlier this year, and more recent problems with an upgraded version of the company's long-haul 777 aircraft that have shaken confidence in the aerospace giant. But from NASA's perspective, Nelson said he had faith in Boeing, the prime contractor of the International Space Station and the agency's Space Launch System Moon rocket, calling the contractor a great partner for NASA over the years. When the Starliner was launched on June 5, one small helium leak in the Starliner's propulsion system was known, but it was not considered a safety threat. During rendezvous with the space station the day after launch, 4 more leaks developed, and 5 of the ship's aft-facing thrusters did not operate as expected. Those two issues triggered 2 months of extensive testing and analysis, adding another $125 million to the mission's price tag, according to a Boeing financial update. Boeing adamantly argued that tests and analyses of the helium leaks and initial trouble with maneuvering thrusters showed the spacecraft had more than enough margin to bring Wilmore and Williams safely back to Earth. The helium leaks are understood, Boeing said. They have not gotten worse, and more than enough of the pressurized gas is on board to push propellants to the thrusters needed to maneuver and stabilize the spacecraft through the critical deorbit braking burn to drop out of orbit for re-entry and landing. Likewise, Boeing engineers believe they understand what caused a handful of aft-facing maneuvering jets to overheat and fire at lower than expected thrust during rendezvous with the space station, causing the Starliner flight computer to shut them down during approach. Ground tests of a new Starliner thruster fired hundreds of times under conditions that mimicked what those aboard the spacecraft experienced, replicated the overheating signature, which was likely caused by multiple firings during tests of the capsule's manual control system during extended exposure to direct sunlight. The higher-than-expected heating likely caused small seals in thruster valve poppets to deform and expand, the analysis indicates, which reduced the flow of propellant. The thrusters aboard the Starliner were test-fired in space under more normal conditions, and all operated properly, indicating the seals had returned to a less intrusive shape. But there was no way to guarantee the seals would not deform again during thruster firings after undocking or during the deorbit burn when larger rocket motors would generate high temperatures in pods housing the smaller thrusters, which are needed to maintain the spacecraft's stability for a precisely targeted landing. "We're all committed to the mission, which is to bring Butch and Suni back," said Steve Stick, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager. But as we got more and more data over the summer and understood the uncertainty of that data, it became very clear to us that the best course of action was to return Starliner uncrewed. If we had a way to accurately predict what the thrusters would do all the way through the deorbit burn and through the separation sequence, I think we would have taken a different course of action. But when we looked at the data and looked at the potential for thruster failures with a crew on board, it was just too much risk. Boeing did not participate in the Saturday news briefing. In a statement following the announcement, Boeing said the company continues to focus first and foremost on the safety of the crew and spacecraft. "We are executing the mission as determined by NASA, and we are preparing the spacecraft for a safe and successful uncrewed return." In the wake of the Space Shuttle's retirement, NASA awarded 2 Commercial Crew Program fixed-price contracts in 2014, one to SpaceX, valued at $2.6 billion, and the other to Boeing for $4.2 billion. The goal was to end NASA's post-shuttle reliance on Russia's Soyuz and to resume launching American astronauts from U.S. soil aboard American rockets and spacecraft. Equally important to NASA was having 2 independent spacecraft for crew flights to the ISS in case one company's ferry ship runs into problems that might ground it for an extended period. "We're one launch anomaly away from losing our ability to support this amazing thing that we do on the International Space Station," said Nick Hague, one of the 4 Crew 9 astronauts. "We're trying to develop Starliner to be that redundant system. A recent Falcon 9 upper stage failure underscores why we need redundancy more than anything I can think of." The original target date for initial piloted commercial crew flights was 2017. Funding shortfalls in Congress and technical snags delayed development, including an explosion during a ground test that destroyed a SpaceX Crew Dragon, but the California rocket builder still managed to kick off piloted flights in May 2020, successfully launching 2 NASA astronauts on a Crew Dragon test. Here's the text rewritten into paragraphs. Since then, SpaceX has launched 8 operational crew rotation flights to the space station, 3 research missions funded by Houston-based Axiom Space, and a purely commercial 2-woman trip to low Earth orbit paid for by billionaire pilot and businessman Jared Isaacman. Isaacman and 3 different crewmates are scheduled to blast off on Tuesday on another commercial SpaceX flight, Polaris Dawn, to set a new Earth orbit altitude record and carry out the first commercial spacewalks. As we approach that flight, a total of 50 people have flown to orbit on 13 Crew Dragon flights. Boeing has now launched 2 astronauts, Wilmore and Williams, but it's not yet known when the ship will be ready to fly again or if another test flight will be ordered. During an initial unpiloted test flight in December 2019, unexpected software and communication glitches prevented a planned rendezvous with the space station. Boeing corrected those problems and opted to carry out a second uncrewed test flight at its own expense. However, during the second countdown, engineers encountered problems with stuck propulsion system valves in the Starliner service module. They eventually traced the issue to moisture intrusion and corrosion, causing another lengthy delay. The second Starliner test flight in May 2022 was a success, docking at the space station as planned and returning to Earth with a pinpoint landing. However, following the flight, engineers discovered new problems, including possible trouble with parachute harness connectors and concerns about protective tape wrapped around wiring that could catch fire in a short circuit. Efforts to correct these issues pushed the first crewed flight to this year. When all was said and done, Boeing spent more than $1.5 billion of its own money to pay for the additional test flight and corrective actions. Now, let's talk about the SpaceX and Boeing collaboration. Both companies received multi-billion-dollar contracts from NASA's Commercial Crew Program back in 2014 to provide astronaut ferrying services. SpaceX launched its version of the crew flight test, known as Demo 2, in May 2020 and is currently in the middle of its 8th operational long-duration crewed mission for the agency. The road for Starliner has been much bumpier. The capsule failed to meet up with the ISS on its first uncrewed test flight in December 2019. Further issues with the capsule's parachute system and wiring, much of which was wrapped in flammable tape, caused additional delays. It's easy to frame the SpaceX-Boeing situation as a race, one that Musk's company is winning handily. However, NASA doesn't see things that way, according to agency chief Bill Nelson. When we expand our fleet of spacecraft, what we're doing is expanding our reach to the stars, Nelson said in a post-launch news conference. So this is a special moment, it's another one of those great markers in history. Boeing representatives also downplayed the competition angle, sending positive vibes towards SpaceX. "We don't see it as a competition," said Mark Nappy, Vice President and Program Manager of Boeing's Commercial Crew Program. "I sit on my front porch and watch every SpaceX mission, and I root for them too. This is something that's great for the entire country." 2 NASA astronauts had reached the final hours before a long-awaited launch attempt aboard Boeing's Starliner capsule, the first crewed mission of the new spacecraft, but the mission was scrubbed about 2 hours before the countdown clock hit zero due to an issue with a valve on the Atlas V rocket. This vehicle, a workhorse built in Alabama by United Launch Alliance, was set to fire the Starliner capsule into space. Launch officials do not yet know when they will make another attempt to get Starliner off the ground, though they are now targeting no earlier than May 10. Good things are worth waiting for, and we'll get a chance to see that rocket and spacecraft get off the pad here soon, said NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Operations, Ken Bowersox, during a news briefing on Monday night. The valve in question is located on the second stage of the Atlas V rocket, the upper portion of the vehicle that is attached to the Starliner spacecraft. Occasionally, valves can get into a position where they start to buzz by opening and closing rapidly, said Tori Bruno, CEO of United Launch Alliance. "Some buzzing is okay, but too much could cause the valve to fail," Bruno added. Now, engineers need to determine whether the component opened and closed enough to cause concern. Officials will spend a day evaluating the issue and deciding whether the valve needs to be replaced and the rocket needs to be rolled back off the launch pad. Before the valve issue arose, Starliner, which Boeing designed to rival SpaceX's prolific Crew Dragon capsule, was set to take off for its inaugural crewed test run at 10:34 p.m. Eastern Time Monday from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. This mission, dubbed the Crew Flight Test, could be the final major milestone before NASA deems Boeing's spacecraft ready for routine operations as part of the federal agency's Commercial Crew Program. The Starliner would join SpaceX's Crew Dragon in NASA's push to collaborate with private industry partners, expanding the United States options for flying astronauts to the International Space Station. The mission crew members are veteran astronaut Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, each of whom has ventured into space on 2 previous journeys aboard NASA's Space Shuttle and Russian Soyuz missions. They're checking out a lot of the systems, the life support, the manual control, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said during a Friday news conference. "That's why we put 2 test pilots on board, and of course, the resumes of Butch and Suni are extensive. This would mark only the 6th maiden voyage of a crewed spacecraft in U.S. history," Nelson noted. "It started with Mercury, then Gemini, Apollo, the Space Shuttle, then SpaceX's Dragon, and now Starliner. Williams will also become the first woman ever to join such a mission. If all goes according to plan after launch, the spacecraft carrying the astronauts will break away from the Atlas V rocket after reaching orbit and begin firing its own engines. The Starliner will then spend more than 24 hours gradually making its way to the space station. Williams and Wilmore are set to spend about a week aboard the orbiting laboratory, joining the 7 astronauts and cosmonauts already on board, while the Starliner remains docked outside. The two will then return home aboard the same Starliner capsule, which is expected to parachute to a landing at one of several designated locations across the southwestern United States. Much is riding on a smooth test flight. NASA has been waiting half a decade for Starliner to begin flying crew, and the development of Starliner has been beset by years of delays, setbacks, and blunders. More broadly, Boeing as a company has suffered years of scandals in its aircraft division, which have tarnished the legacy aerospace giant's brand. "We got through a pretty rigorous process to get here," said Mark Nappy, Vice President and Starliner Program Manager at Boeing, of the development process during the Friday briefing. "And really where my source of confidence comes from is going through that process." If successful, the crew test flight could position Boeing to begin flying routine trips to the space station on NASA's behalf. The U.S. Space Agency selected Boeing to develop Starliner alongside SpaceX and its Crew Dragon capsule in 2014, hoping the commercial companies could create complementary new means of flying astronauts to the International Space Station after the Space Shuttle program retired in 2011. SpaceX ultimately beat Boeing to the launch pad, carrying out its crewed flight test of the Crew Dragon capsule in May 2020. SpaceX has handled most of NASA's crew transportation needs since then. "We cheer for SpaceX," Nappy said during a March news briefing. "That's something that is very important to our country and very important to NASA, to have that access. And we're looking forward to providing astronaut transportation services as well. For as long as we can remember, humanity has always been interested in exploring the vast world of space beyond our planet. And what better place to start than on the Moon?" Plans to set foot on the Moon started way back in 1960. Initially, the goal was to send a 3-man team to orbit the Moon, not land on it. It was during the famous speech of then-President John Kennedy in 1962 that the dream of landing a man on the Moon before 1970 was crystallized in the heart of America. Kennedy's dream did come to pass when the first man on the Moon, Neil Armstrong, took his first steps in 1969. But accomplishing this vision came with a lot of labor and sacrifices. The government had to recruit the brightest minds and experts to work on this project, and a ton of financial resources were poured into it. But even so, the first mission wasn't even close to success. The Apollo 1 mission was NASA's first attempt to visit the Moon with astronauts. It featured astronauts Virgil Grom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee. Sadly, these men lost their lives when a fire broke out in the spacecraft's command module, destroying everything. The mission failed, prompting NASA to conduct a series of investigations into the incident and extensively rework the command module. They eventually decided it would be best to add another launch vehicle that would carry the main payload, the lunar module. Subsequent missions from Apollo 4 to 9 focused on testing the newly improved spacecraft and adding more features. No missions were designated as Apollo 2 or 3 because these early missions seemed more like repetitions of Apollo 1 but didn't feature any crew on board, so NASA chose to leave them out of the numbering. Apollo 10 marked a significant milestone in this journey. It was the 4th human spaceflight mission in the Apollo program, and this time, the astronauts successfully circled the Moon and returned without any issues. The Apollo 10 mission set the stage for Apollo 11, with the only difference being that Apollo 10 astronauts didn't land on the Moon. By this time, scientists had learned a great deal about the Moon. They could predict what the Moon's surface and weather conditions would feel like and replicated these scenarios to train astronauts before sending them to the Moon. Although telescopes, space probes, and satellites had already provided a wealth of knowledge about the Moon, nothing compared to actually landing on it and retrieving samples. These trial Apollo missions helped NASA understand what it would take to transport humans to the Moon and back. Therefore, when Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the Moon, it marked a phenomenal moment in history that was celebrated worldwide. Apollo 11's success inspired NASA to launch subsequent missions to the Moon and encouraged other world leaders to pursue their own moon landing attempts. The photos and videos of astronauts from these Apollo missions have gone viral and never seem to lose their appeal. However, since the first moon landing, unexplained phenomena and conspiracy theories have emerged, often fueled by leaked information from whistleblowers. One of the more prominent conspiracy theories is that the moon landing was staged and never actually happened. Although this claim might seem obscure, proponents argue there is evidence to support it. One point they make is that in most NASA clips featuring astronauts on the moon, there are no stars visible in the sky. Since stars are inseparable from outer space and are visible in nearly all NASA space probe and telescope images, the absence of stars in Apollo mission photos and videos is curious. If stars can be seen from Earth, shouldn't they be even more visible from the Moon? NASA has countered this claim with a reasonable explanation: stars appear absent from the lunar images due to the lighting conditions and the types of cameras used back then. Additionally, the light from the sun made the stars appear less bright and, therefore, invisible. Another argument presented by conspiracy theorists is the lack of a blast crater on the Moon, which would indicate where the Apollo craft landed. NASA has debunked this by explaining that the layer of dust covering the Moon's surface absorbed the impact of the descending craft, resulting in no visible crater. Over 50 years have passed since Armstrong and Aldrin first set foot on the Moon, but their footprints are still visible on the lunar surface. Other evidence left behind at the moon landing site has been confirmed, further supporting Elon Musk's assertion that the United States did indeed land on the Moon and that conspiracy theorists are mistaken. Following Apollo 11, 6 more Apollo missions were conducted, with Apollo 17 being the official final mission. Nevertheless, some believe that this was not the last mission. There are rumors suggesting that NASA continued sending people on classified Apollo missions, up to Apollo 20. Some of these rumors even claim that the agency may have encountered alien life on the Moon. While NASA has denied these allegations, such rumors fuel the moon landing hoax theories. Apollo 17, the last official Apollo mission, took place in 1972, and NASA has not conducted another moon mission since then, raising questions about why this is the case. Over the past 5 decades, several changes have occurred at the moon landing site. For instance, the American flag planted on the Moon has significantly degraded, despite being made of special materials designed to withstand lunar conditions. Additionally, items left on the Moon by the first astronauts have been covered by fine lunar dust. On September 14, 1959, the Soviet Union successfully landed a human-made craft on the Moon, making them the first to achieve this feat. This likely spurred the United States to invest all its resources in the Apollo missions, ultimately winning the race by being the first country to land a manned spacecraft and walk on the Moon. Despite these achievements, some experts remain skeptical, believing that a larger political agenda may be at play. Since the United States' successful Apollo missions, the Soviet space program has conducted about 23 missions to the Moon. Not a single whistleblower from these missions has come forward to accuse the US government or deny seeing the American flags and plaques planted on the Moon. Certainly, if any country would have a vested interest in exposing a fake moon landing, it would be Russia. Nevertheless, there have been numerous whistleblowers within NASA over the years, and some of the leaked photos and documents from these individuals can appear convincing to the public, fueling strong arguments. For example, there is the issue of the waving flag. Despite the Moon's lack of atmosphere and wind, the flags planted by the astronauts seem to be waving. NASA has explained that this is due to vibrations from the Moon's interior and the way the flags were being handled or mounted. One of the strongest arguments used by conspiracy theorists to support the moon landing hoax theory involves the shadows of the astronauts and how they move. The shadows in the lunar images released by NASA do not lie parallel to each other or point in the same direction. Given that sunlight was the primary source of illumination, these shadows should point in a single direction. These inconsistent shadows have led some to suggest that the photos were staged in a studio or secret location with multiple light sources. Although this shadow anomaly may seem convincing, it does not definitively prove that the photos are fake. The discrepancies could be due to the viewer's perspective. Additionally, the cameras used during the lunar missions were not as advanced as modern cameras, which can capture explicit details in photo backgrounds. NASA had to enhance these images to make them clearer and more suitable for public viewing, which could account for any anomalies. Moreover, the lighting technology available at the time would have resulted in photos that looked entirely different from the ones taken on the moon. Even if the photos are genuine, there remains controversy surrounding the videos. Some experts have noted inconsistencies in the physics portrayed in different videos. In some footage, astronauts are seen walking slowly, while in others, they appear to be bouncing as if on a trampoline. To add to the controversy, NASA was once caught attempting to pass off training photos as authentic lunar images. Before Armstrong and Aldrin's historic moonwalk, NASA trained them to use scientific equipment and cameras, conducting trial sessions and simulations in moon-like environments. In 2006, it emerged that NASA had lost some of the original recordings of the first moon landing. Some whistleblowers alleged that NASA tried to replace these lost recordings with training clips. Video experts with keen observational skills could even identify discrepancies between different video releases. This one misstep by NASA fueled the belief in the artificial moon theory, which suggests that the moon is an artificial structure. Some extreme versions of this theory even posit that the moon was placed by an alien race to monitor humanity. However, this theory does not hold up well because astronauts have collected a wealth of data and samples that reveal the moon's composition, age, and formation process. The prevalence of conspiracy theory surrounding NASA's moon landing is largely attributed to the book We Never Went to the Moon published in 1976 by Bill Kaysing. Due to its controversial subject matter, the book became an instant hit, and many of the conspiracy theories discussed today were first introduced in its pages. However, the surprising fact is that this author, Bill Kaysing, is not a scientist, engineer, or expert in anything related to science. In fact, before this time, his books were solely focused on cooking and agriculture. However, Kaysing was very confident in his book and even defended it on national TV. A lot of Americans believed his story, mostly because people didn't have much trust in the government at the time due to several political issues. While there may be many suspicious flaws and unconnected dots in NASA's lunar exploration missions, there is substantial evidence that the moon landing did, in fact, happen. Just so you know, the world might yet witness an even greater moonwalk than the Apollo missions. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has made some quite shocking revelations. Musk has announced that we will soon go to the moon again, but this mission will be much bigger than just walking on the moon or collecting samples. He added that his company, SpaceX, has a contract with the government to take astronauts to the moon. As we all know, Elon Musk strongly believes in the possibility of life beyond Earth, and SpaceX is solely devoted to making this dream come true. This is why the space agency is deeply involved in exploring Mars and setting up a Martian base that could accommodate humans. SpaceX's mission is to establish this Martian base and gradually transport humans to Mars before some pandemic or otherworldly disaster destroys our planet. In case you're wondering how we'll get to Mars, SpaceX has some of the world's most advanced rockets and spacecraft, making the transportation of humans feasible when the time comes. However, during a recent podcast, Elon Musk shared that SpaceX will first send astronauts to the moon before sending humans to Mars. He explained that SpaceX is working on a gigantic super heavy-lift Starship. Compared to all the previous models, this Starship can transport 100 tons of payload effectively and could even be used to build a moon base. In Musk's words, we could go way beyond what was done with the Apollo program, where they had a small lander. Elon Musk believes that the first successful Apollo mission was an anomaly, an event in human history that happened much quicker than it should have. He remarked that the technology and skill the United States deployed to make that mission successful were way ahead of their time. According to Musk, it should have been impossible to have humans walking on the moon as early as 1969, but the United States government decided it needed to happen, so they did everything possible to ensure it did. Musk likened this to reaching into the future and bringing technology to the present, which he argues is not the natural pace of technological development. This time, Elon Musk envisions the lunar mission to be a monumental one. Unfortunately, his company SpaceX will be the one to see it through. His final words during the recent podcast were, "I think we should build a city on the moon and on Mars."